I called to ask when the grand opening was, and my daughter-in-law said, "We celebrated last night." I was standing in my kitchen in Savannah, the lights low, the old clock over the sink ticking like it was keeping score. I had sanded those bar stools with my own hands. I had co-signed the lease. I had put my retirement fund on hold for a dream that belonged to my son. If you're listening, check, you're subscribed. Because what I started to find in the hours after that call changed everything. They'd use the phrase, important people, like a lock. Important people. The words sat in my chest and settled there. On the other end of the line, I could hear music and laughter, a background that was suddenly not mine. Ethan didn't say anything at first. I could hear him breathing, like someone who'd practiced indifference. Then a voice, sweet and sharp, said the words, and cut me out of the room where I thought I belonged. I stood in my doorway with the phone in my hand, and felt the house move around me. The photographs, the mug with Laura's name, the creak in the stair, where Ethan had broken his arm once. I remembered promise after promise I'd made, the ways I'd put my life on hold, the dinners missed and repairs delayed, because when your son needs you, you are there. But some things you give away are not just money. They are time. They are expectations. They are the quiet agreements that make a family. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the drawer where I keep the small metal box. Old bank slips, canceled checks, the receipts that map how I had helped them for 4 years. I started writing, not because I wanted to count, but because I needed to know what the absence of being important cost me. Deposit by deposit, transfer by transfer. It stared back at me. $39,200. Numbers on a yellow legal pad, black ink, like a verdict. I thought of the truck I had sold so Ethan could hire a plasterer, of the fishing trip I canceled to cover payroll, of the nights I sat up late and wired money because they said they'd make it right. That number was the price of being invisible at the one thing they celebrated without me. I drove by the place that afternoon. The sign said, Blue Rail, in that washed, neon blue that looks good in photos. There were pictures up on their page. Smiling faces and glow. Ethan behind the bar, shaking a cocktail. Maya in a dress that caught the light. Opening night with our favorite people. The caption read, No me. No mention of the man who'd sanded the stools, the man who'd taken out a loan to help them sign the lease. I stared until my eyes stung, and then I did something I'd never done before. I blocked their account. It was a small thing. Childish maybe. But I couldn't keep scrolling through proof that I was not an important person in my own son's life. The block felt final, like turning the page on a book that had chapters I no longer recognized. The next morning I went to the bank. I needed to stop the automatic transfers, to undo the guarantees I'd signed, thinking I was rescuing a boy with a plan. The teller, a quiet woman named Marta, led me to an office and said things she didn't mean to judge. This happens more than you'd think. We went through the accounts. We canceled overdraft protections. Removed my name as a guarantor. With every form signed, my chest lightened a little. The banker looked up and said, Sometimes, stopping is the hardest thing. He was right. For years I had been the cushion beneath other people's falls. Stopping felt like stepping off a cliff and expecting to stand. I left with photocopies and a folder labeled Done in my head. I thought that would be the end of it. I was naive. They responded the way a cornered animal does. The texts started as pressure. We're behind on invoices. We need payroll, Dad. You promised. They were practiced in urgency. Then the pressure turned to paper. A man in a suit came to the door the next week. Not the warm right-handed lawyer who once praised my support, but a polite messenger with a packet that read like a threat. Voluntary guardianship forms. You could almost feel the room narrow as he sat at my kitchen table and slid the paper across to me. This could be for your safety, he said. The kind of line designed to make a man doubt his own steadiness. After the block and the bank forms, I felt a new thing. Suspicion. Not a small suspicion, but a hot, precise one that tastes like metal. I'd been helping them into a future. They were building a future that would leave me with nothing. Mrs. Patel next door had become my unexpected witness to this slow unravel. She'd known Ethan when he was small, and saw the way things shifted when Maya came in with plans and lists. "I've seen them yelling in the car, Frank," she said, over lemon biscotti. "He says you'll pay. He always says that." She handed me a crumpled invoice someone had left at her door. It was for a supplier that delivered kegs and glassware, and it listed my account number as the billing information. I felt something drop cold and solid into my stomach. She didn't want to pry. She just wanted me to know she had seen. That small act of neighborliness unspooled a thread. If the bills were in my name, if the payments were routed through my accounts, then this was not oversight. This was method. That night, someone came to my house pretending to be from the utility company. They had a clipboard and a script. They asked about my account and whether anyone else had authority to make changes. I stood on the porch and watched them scribble and walk away. Later, when I called the company, the representative said the work order looked suspicious. The request had originated from an account tied to Blue Rail. It was a warning shot. It was not just money. It was control. They were testing the perimeter, seeing what would move if they pulled the string. I started gathering everything: emails, receipts, screenshots of the transfers that had quietly bled my savings. I photographed the legal pad and made a copy of the invoice Mrs. Patel had given me. For the first time since Laura died, I felt both frightened and clear. Fear is a fire that often burns confusion away and leaves you with a single, sharp aim. Mine was simple: document. By the time I sat down to make a list for the lawyer, the pattern was ugly and bureaucratic. Automatic withdrawals, vendor invoices redirected, a forged authorization for a service I never ordered. Each line on the page pushed me from hurt into calculation. I thought about the small things too. The watch on my wrist, my dad's watch, that I'd never sold because it marked the seasons of a life I'd tried to keep upright for others. It ticked steady as I wrote names and dates. I told myself to breathe, to put one piece beside another. A case is made of facts. Facts are not sentimental. Facts are iron. When I called attorney Shelby Rivera, she listened without the kind of pity that makes you smaller. She asked me a question that felt like a shield. Do you want to be safe, or do you want to be right? I wanted both, of course. But there comes a moment when you must choose the method of your defense. She told me how these schemes work, how adult children can weaponize concern and paperwork, and how guardianship petitions are sometimes used to strip people of their rights under the guise of care. She asked me for everything: bank statements, receipts, witness names. I felt raw but steadier. The ledger of $39,200 looked less like ruin and more like proof. It had weight, and now it would have witnesses. That night I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone cold and the legal pad in front of me. The number was there, black and undeniable. I whispered to the empty room, to the photographs on the mantel, to the clock that had kept me company for decades. I did what I thought a father should. I had given, until there was almost nothing left of the quiet life Laura and I had planned. But giving is not the same as erasing yourself. There is a boundary you meet in later years, a line you draw to preserve the life you have left. I wasn't proud that I'd waited so long to draw it. I was only resolved: if they planned to take my autonomy, I would not step down quietly. The first step toward justice, I learned that night, is to stop being invisible. I didn't sleep the night after the bar opening call. Not even for a minute. I sat in that old recliner by the window, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and watching shadows shift across my living room, like they were trying to tell me something I'd ignored for too long. The truth sat in my chest like a stone. I wasn't an invited guest in my son's life anymore. I was a silent wallet, pulled out when necessary, and put away when the photo opportunities came. By sunrise, the house felt colder. Not because the temperature had dropped, but because something inside me had. For most of my life, I'd been the one who fixed things at dawn. When Ethan was little, he'd wake me up before the sun rose because he had nightmares. I'd sit with him on this same couch, warming up milk, telling him the world was safer than it felt. Now I was waking up from my own nightmare. Except this one was real. Around 8 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Normally, that sound sent a jolt through me. Years of habit. Ethan always called when something was wrong, and something was always wrong. But this time I let it ring until it stopped. The silence afterward felt unfamiliar. almost rebellious. Eventually, I answered the voicemail. It was Maya. Her voice was clipped, stripped of the sugary tone she used when she wanted something. "Frank," she said, "the bar's liquor order is overdue. We thought you were transferring the money already. The bank is threatening a penalty. Call back. Immediately. Not please. Not thank you. Just immediately." I held the phone in my hand for a long moment, and then placed it face down on the table. Something inside me finally snapped into place, a boundary I didn't know I had. Or maybe I'd buried it. I whispered to myself, "Not this time." I grabbed the old metal box from the closet, the one my wife used to store important documents. I hadn't touched it since she passed. Lifting the lid released a faint scent of old paper and cedar. Inside were receipts, bank slips, loan papers, screenshots I had printed because I didn't trust digital storage. Every time I said, "Sure, kiddo," I had saved the proof without even knowing why. Maybe some part of me saw this coming. I spread everything across the table. The numbers stared back at me like bruises. 30, 40, 50 payments I barely remembered making. Every one of them disguised as a promise. "We'll pay you back next month. We just need help getting started. You're the only one who believes in us." The stack grew until the table disappeared beneath it. Then came the number I couldn't ignore. $42,600. I sat back in my chair. My chest tightened, but the sharp pain wasn't heartbreak. It was clarity. It was the realization that I had donated nearly everything I had to a dream I wasn't even allowed to witness. And the worst part? I wasn't surprised. By early afternoon, I dressed in clean jeans and a dark shirt, grabbed the folder, and drove to the bank. I'd been going there for over 20 years. I knew the automatic doors better than my own back door. But that morning, the place felt different. The floor seemed colder. The lights felt harsher. Luis, the branch manager, looked up the moment I walked in. His expression softened. "Morning, Frank. Everything all right?" I shook my head. "Not exactly. I need to talk to you." We stepped into his office. The blinds cast striped shadows across the desk. I placed the folder down in front of him just as evenly as I could. "I want every automatic transfer to stop," I said. "Every overdraft link. Every safety net tied to my son's business. Remove it all." Luis blinked, surprised. "This is a big change. You sure about it?" "Yes," I said. "More sure than I've been about anything in years." For a while, he typed quietly. With every click, something loosened in my chest. A rope I'd tied around myself for years finally began to unwind. "Frank," he said after a pause, "I don't mean to pry, but did something happen?" I could have lied. I could have shrugged. But something in his tone reminded me of those mornings after my wife passed, when neighbors left soup at the door and asked the same question. "They opened the bar without me," I said. "They didn't even tell me. And still, they expect me to carry the bills." He exhaled slowly. "I've seen this before. Parents giving until they have nothing left. Usually ends in one of two ways." "And what ways?" I asked. "Either the parent goes under," he said softly, "or the parent finally stops." I nodded. "I'm stopping." After leaving the bank, I drove past the bar. The neon sign flickered proudly over the entrance. Through the windows, I saw polished wood tables I helped sand, lights I helped install, and bar stools I had paid for. I watched as strangers clinked glasses and took Instagram photos in a place I had literally built with my hands. And that's when something inside me hardened. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It was survival. When I got home, a knock sounded on the door. Sharp, impatient. I opened it to find Ethan and Maya standing on my porch. Ethan looked frayed. Guilt, tangled with frustration. Maya looked like she wasn't here for negotiation. She was here for a transaction. "Dad," Ethan said, pushing past me. "We need to talk." I stood in the hallway while they walked into my kitchen like they owned it. "The bank said you canceled everything," Maya said, voice hard. "Transfers, overdraft, protections, all of it." "That's right," I answered. "Why would you do that?" Ethan snapped. I didn't raise my voice. "Would you open your bar without telling me?" I asked quietly. Ethan froze. For a moment, the truth hung in the air like smoke. Maya stepped in. "This is business," she said. This isn't personal. It's personal to me. She rolled her eyes. We need 3,000 by Monday. Payroll is due. I let the number settle. Then I asked, how much more do you expect me to pay for your dream? Silence. Maya's jaw tightened. If the bar fails, she hissed, it'll be your fault. The world didn't stop. The house didn't shake. But something inside me went still, a silence so deep it felt like frost spreading through my ribs. I set the notepad on the table. This, I said, tapping the 42,600 total, is what I've already given. I'm done. Ethan looked at me as if he didn't recognize me. And maybe he didn't, because for the first time, I wasn't bending. I wasn't smoothing things over. I wasn't rescuing him. I walked to the door and opened it. It's time to go, I said softly. Both of you. They left. Not because they agreed, but because I finally meant it. Later that night, the house felt quieter than ever. It wasn't peaceful yet, but it was mine again. I stood by the window, looking out at the streetlights glowing across the pavement. For the first time in months, I breathed, without waiting for the phone to ring. I didn't know what they would do next, but I knew one thing, with absolute certainty. Whatever storm was coming, I was not walking into it unprepared. I sat across from attorney Shelby Rivera the next morning, the blinds behind her casting thin bars of light across her desk. There was something steady about her, the way she held a pen, the way she listened without rushing me, the way her eyes didn't flinch when I told her how deep the money went. She didn't write immediately. She let the weight of the story settle first, like she needed to feel its gravity before she could help me lift it. Frank, she said quietly, this isn't a family misunderstanding. This is a pattern. A deliberate one. We need to treat it like a case. A case. I'd lived 67 years without thinking my son might someday become the subject of an investigation involving me. Hearing the word case made the small office feel colder. Rivera slid a yellow legal pad toward herself. We start with evidence. No emotions. Just facts. You'll give me everything you have. Dates, transfers, messages, the forged signature authorization, whatever you can pull. I reached into my coat pocket and set the folded receipts on her desk. She read them, one by one, her jaw tightening slightly. That slight clench people do when they pretend to be neutral. Then she asked for the bank statements. Then, the utility letter. Then, the screenshot Mrs. Patel had given me. When she read the invoice addressed to my account number, her fingers stopped mid-page. This isn't accidental, she murmured. This is coordinated financial coercion. Her voice was calm. Mine wasn't. So what happens next? She leaned back. The moment you cut them off financially, people like your son and daughter-in-law tend to escalate. They move from guilt to fear tactics, from fear tactics to paperwork, sometimes to full legal control. I knew what she was saying before she finished. Guardianship, I whispered. Rivera nodded once. If they go that route, they'll try to paint you as confused, unstable, vulnerable. But we won't let them. You're going to get a full psychological evaluation, legitimate, documented, and we'll build your defense before they can build their attack. I felt something inside me uncoil just hearing the word defense. For months, maybe even years, I'd been reacting, funding, fixing, patching holes in their dream. Now, I was finally preparing, not to fight my son as a son, but as a man trying to take what didn't belong to him. She handed me a list. I need witnesses who see you regularly. Anyone who can speak to your stability neighbors, your pharmacist, a coworker, a friend. Mrs. Patel, I said. She knows the situation. Good. And anyone else? I hesitated. Detective Ross. He came by after a suspicious welfare call. Rivera's eyebrows twitched upward. Suspicious call? Anonymous, I said. About my well-being. He said the report sounded exaggerated. Then he's a witness too. Her efficiency was comforting. She didn't ask why this happened. She didn't ask what kind of father I had been. She only asked what we needed to prove. When I walked out of her office, the sunlight felt sharper, almost intrusive, as if the world outside wasn't ready for the quiet storm beginning inside me. I held my folder close like armor. Proof. Facts. My life reduced to paper, but still mine. I spent the afternoon gathering what Rivera asked for. Copies of bank statements, screenshots, dates, transactions. I spread them across my dining table. A map of betrayal. If anyone had walked into my home at that moment, they would have thought I was solving someone else's crime. But it was my own. Around dusk, I knocked on Mrs. Patel's door. She opened it with that warm, soft concern only elderly neighbors seem to master. We sat at her kitchen table with ginger tea. "I need your help," I said. "You have it," she replied without hesitation. I told her what Rivera told me, the need for witnesses, the possibility of a guardianship move. Her face twisted, equal parts anger and disbelief. "But you're as clear-minded as I am," she said, tapping her temple. "More, actually." "I know," I said. "But they're trying to make it look otherwise." She squeezed my hand. "Then I'll tell the truth. I've heard them outside, Frank. I've heard how they talk about you. And I've seen you steady, capable, living your own life. Anyone who says otherwise is lying." Her confidence steadied me. I didn't realize how badly I needed someone to believe me, until she did. Later that evening, I received a voicemail from an unknown number. I pressed play. Maya's voice. Sweet at first, then serrated underneath. "Frank, look, this whole money thing is getting out of hand. We're drowning. You stepping back now is, honestly, irresponsible. If the bar collapses, that's on you. And if you're refusing help because you're confused or influenced by someone, then maybe we should talk about guardianship. For your good. For your good." I replayed that part twice. She wasn't even pretending anymore. I forwarded the voicemail directly to Rivera. Her reply came within minutes. "Save everything. They're preparing a narrative." I barely slept that night. The house felt too quiet. The rooms too still. Every shadow looked like a threat wearing Ethan's expression. At 3 a.m., I walked to the kitchen and stared at the old clock on the wall, the second hand, ticking in a steady circle. That clock had hung there since the year Ethan was born. I wondered how many hours, days, years I'd lost, helping him chase dreams that had no foundation. I whispered into the dark, "Not anymore." The next morning, a white sedan pulled up in front of my house. Formal. Intentional. The kind of car that arrives when decisions are made behind closed doors. A woman stepped out wearing a charcoal suit and holding a clipboard. "Are you Frank Hale?" she asked. "Yes." She lifted a thick envelope. "You've been served." My stomach dropped, but my hands stayed steady. I opened it right there on the porch. A petition. Full guardianship. Filed by Ethan and Maya. Words blurred. Reformed. Sharpened. Respondent is mentally incompetent. Erratic behavior. Financial mismanagement. Needs immediate intervention. It felt like falling through a floor I didn't know could break. The woman cleared her throat. "Please sign to confirm receipt." I signed. Not because I accepted it, but because it was the first step toward proving it wrong. Inside the house, the silence rang louder. I sat down on the couch and read every line, every accusation, every lie, every twist of truth. By the time I finished, my hands were trembling. Not from fear, from a slow, rising heat that felt like resolve turning into steel. I called Rivera. "They filed it," I said. "I assumed they would," she replied calmly. "Bring it in. We start our counter today." I grabbed my jacket, my folder, the stacked evidence from the table. Before I walked out the door, I stopped by the clock again. I touched its wooden frame, worn smooth from years of life, and whispered, "It's my time now." Then I left the house and headed straight into the battle they thought I couldn't win. Attorney Rivera cleared space on her desk so we could lay out the paperwork side by side. Their petition on the left, my evidence on the right. The contrast was almost laughable. Their stack was thick with accusations. Mine was heavy with facts. Rivera tapped the first page with her pen. "They built their case on performance," she said. "We'll build ours on truth. And truth always hits harder." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. She didn't treat me like a victim. She treated me like a partner. Someone fighting to reclaim the life others tried to rewrite. She began outlining the counter strategy, her voice steady, confident. "First, we demolish their medical claims. Dr. Halden's evaluation will do that. Second, we dismantle the behavioral allegations. That's where the detective and neighbors come in. Third, we expose intent. The financial trail speaks louder than any testimony. And last, she glanced at me. We show the court who has something to gain. Because it certainly isn't you. Her confidence steadied me more than she knew. When I left her office, the clouds had thickened over the city. The kind of heavy, low sky that made the streets feel narrow. I drove straight to the clinic, where Dr. Halden saw seniors for cognitive evaluations. The receptionist recognized my name from Rivera's referral and guided me to a quiet room. The doctor entered with a soft smile. Frank Hale. That's me. He shook my hand with both of his. Let's get started. We'll take our time. For nearly 2 hours, he tested everything. Memory, reasoning, focus, problem-solving, recall. It wasn't invasive. It was calm, almost gentle, as if he was cataloging the parts of my mind that still worked because I fought to keep them sharp. When the session ended, he closed his notebook slowly. Mr. Hale, he said, I see no evidence of cognitive decline. None. You're fully capable of managing your own affairs. A weight lifted from my chest, not just relief, but validation. For months, Maya had whispered that I was forgetting things, mixing things up, confused. Sometimes, late at night, those comments replayed in my mind until doubt tried to settle in. But hearing a professional say the opposite felt like a lock clamping shut on their lies. I asked, will this hold up in court? It will, he said firmly. And I'll be there to say it. That night, I spread the documents across my dining table again. Evidence, dates, transfers, messages, voicemails. I highlighted what Rivera told me to highlight. Proof of coercion, proof of intent, proof of escalation. But as I was organizing the papers, my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Dad, we need to talk. You're blowing things out of proportion. The guardianship is just temporary. We're protecting you. You're not thinking clearly. Stop making this harder. Protecting me. Not thinking clearly. Temporary. The same script Maya used. The same lines I'd heard from people who didn't want guardianship, they wanted control. I didn't reply. Instead, I screenshotted the message and added it to the folder. I went to bed early, but sleep didn't come easily. I kept picturing Ethan at 10 years old running across the backyard in a jersey far too big for him. Laughing, shouting, Dad, watch this. I remembered teaching him to tie his shoes, to ride a bike, to drive a car. There had been so much life between us. And somewhere along the line, it had twisted into something unrecognizable. At dawn, a sharp knock echoed through the house. Not a neighbor's knock, not polite, not gentle. I slipped on my robe and opened the door. Detective Ross stood on my porch, rain dripping off his jacket. Morning, Mr. Hale, he said. May I come in? Something about his expression told me this wasn't a social visit. I stepped aside. He surveyed the documents spread across the dining table. Attorney Rivera briefed me, he said. But something else came in this morning. He took out a folded report. A second, anonymous welfare call, he said. This one claims you've become aggressive, paranoid, refusing medication, and possibly at risk of harming yourself. My stomach dropped. That's not just a lie, he added. That's a tactical move before a hearing. They're trying to build a pattern. I felt the walls shift. Not physically, emotionally. Like the floor under my life had one more inch left to give before it caved completely. Ross rested a hand on the back of a chair. Here's the thing, he said. I closed the case already. Your home was clean, you were stable, conversation was coherent. There is zero basis for their claims. So what happens now? I asked. He straightened. Now, we document everything. He placed a copy of the report on my table and signed it himself. This goes into evidence. It shows bad faith. He looked around my house, his eyes lingering on the new locks. You're doing everything right, Frank. People like your son. They push until they get what they want. But sometimes, they push too far. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Be ready. Their next move might go public. Public. The word hit me like cold wind. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Patel came by with a bag of groceries. You shouldn't be alone, she said softly. Her presence made the house feel less brittle. As she unpacked tomatoes and fresh bread onto the counter, She looked up at me. "You know," she said, "people show who they are when money is involved. But they show who they truly are when money is gone." I nodded. I knew exactly what she meant. That evening, I met Rivera again. She added Ross's signed report into the binder, page by page. "This," she said, tapping the stack, "is the backbone of your case. They built theirs on manipulation. We built ours on record." I asked, "Do you think they'll show up at the hearing confident?" "They'll show up thinking the court is a stage," she said, "but we're going to make it a mirror. A mirror. A place where their lies reflected back at them, until there was nowhere left to hide." When I drove home, the city lights blurred through the windshield. The streets felt heavier, quieter, as if the whole town sensed the storm closing in. I unlocked the door, hung my jacket, and took one last look at the binder on my table. This wasn't just paper. It was my life, my name, my freedom, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready for it. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse looked nothing like the place I remembered from jury duty years ago. Back then, it felt ordinary: fluorescent lights, scuffed floors, people drifting in and out. But that day, it felt like the center of a storm I'd been walking toward for months. I arrived early, binder tucked under my arm, the one Rivera told me to hold as if it were part of my spine. She met me by security. Her coat was still damp from the rain outside, but her expression was all steel. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. More than I expected to be. Inside the courtroom, the air smelled of old wood and quiet expectations. Ethan and Maya sat at the opposite table with their lawyer, a man who carried the same smugness he'd shown the day he brought their petition to my door. Ethan didn't look at me at first. Maya did. Her expression was a perfect blend of pity and calculation. A mask she'd worn so long she probably couldn't take it off anymore. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Judge Rollins, late 60s, sharp eyes, the kind of presence that could silence a room without raising her voice. I felt a strange flicker of hope. This wasn't someone who would fall for theatrics. Their lawyer opened with a practiced tone, lowering his voice at all the concerned family parts, raising it when describing my alleged decline. He painted a picture of confusion, forgetfulness, erratic behavior, paranoia. Maya dabbed her eyes at all the right moments. Ethan kept his head down, shoulders hunched, the pose of a son wounded by a father who refused help. Then came the witnesses they'd gathered. A neighbor who barely knew me claimed I yelled at shadows. A pharmacist admitted he signed something he didn't understand but tried to defend it anyway. A man I'd never seen before spoke of moments of agitation, though he couldn't recall dates, times, or details. Their entire performance lasted nearly 40 minutes. By the end of it, anyone who didn't know me might have believed the story. But Judge Rollins had barely written a line. Then, it was our turn. Rivera stood. Calm. Confident. She didn't match their theatrics. She didn't need to. "Your Honor," she said, "the petitioner's narrative is built on fear. Ours is built on fact." She called Dr. Halden first. He walked to the witness chair like a man who'd spent a lifetime cutting through excuses. "Mr. Hale shows no cognitive decline," he said. "No confusion. No impairment. He is fully capable of every aspect of independent living." His report was entered into evidence, stamped, dated, signed. Then came Detective Ross. He described the welfare checks, the orderliness of my home, the clarity of my responses, the fabricated nature of the anonymous reports. Next, the utility representative, confirming the fraudulent shutoff request. Next, the bank manager, testifying how every risky financial decision had originated from Ethan and Maya, not me. Then Mrs. Patel. Her testimony wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. "I see Frank every day," she told the court. "He is steady, coherent, kind, and capable. If he were confused, I'd know. If he were unstable, I'd know. And if anyone is manipulating anyone." She paused, her eyes landing directly on Maya. "It isn't him." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Finally, Rivera placed the binder in front of the judge. "Your Honor, this is the financial record. 4 years of withdrawals and payments. Every dollar accounted for. No erratic behavior. Only exploitation. This is the truth of the matter. When she rested her hand on the binder, it felt like she was resting a hand on my shoulder. Then she nodded at me. It was my turn. I stood slowly, my palms warm but steady. As I walked to the stand, I felt time stretch out every moment of the last few years pressing behind my ribs. I loved my son, I began. For most of my life, that love meant giving money, time, help, whatever he needed. I never asked for it back. I never asked for thanks. My voice wavered, not from fear, but from old wounds reopening. But the night he opened his bar without me, I swallowed. I learned I wasn't family anymore. I was funding. I told the story plainly. The invoices, the transfers, the forged authorization, the shut-off attempt, the welfare calls, the guardianship threat. I didn't embellish a word. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. When I finished, the silence in the room felt heavier than anything spoken. Judge Rollins looked down at the petition, then at the binder, then at Ethan, who finally lifted his eyes toward me. There was something hollow in them. Not love, not guilt, but recognition. He knew the story he built was crumbling in front of him. The judge cleared her throat. "This court," she said, "finds no evidence. None that Mr. Hale is mentally unfit." Ethan's shoulders slumped. Rollins continued. "What I do find is a concerning pattern of financial pressure, manipulation, and false reporting by the petitioners. Therefore, the guardianship petition is denied." Denied. The word didn't just hit the room, it hit my life. But she wasn't done. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to Adult Protective Services for investigation as a possible case of attempted elder financial exploitation." Maya's face drained of color. Ethan's lawyer clenched his jaw. "With respect to the petitioners," the judge added, "you have abused the legal process, and this court will not overlook that." Her gavel came down with a sharp crack that felt like a door slamming shut behind me. When we exited the courtroom, Ethan approached. His voice was small, almost boyish. "Dad, I didn't mean." I raised a hand. "No," I said softly. "You meant every part of it. That's the problem." He looked down at the floor. For a moment, I saw the little boy he once was. The boy who asked me to hold the back of his bike while he learned to ride. The boy who used to run to the door when I came home from work. But that boy was gone. Maya didn't speak at all. She didn't have to. The fear in her eyes said everything. Rivera and I walked out into the sunlight. The air felt warmer, cleaner. When I reached my car, I stopped, placed my hand on the roof, and took a long breath. I didn't win because of anger. I didn't win because I fought harder. I won because the truth survived everything they tried to bury it under. Weeks passed. Then months. I moved to a quiet neighborhood near the river, a place where mornings smelled like bakeries and fresh coffee. I learned to paint again. I planted herbs in small clay pots. I volunteered twice a week at a community center helping newcomers settle. Life didn't return to what it once was. It became something better. Sometimes, when the sun set over the water, I'd whisper to myself, "You're free, Frank. Fully. Finally free." And that was enough. Now I'll ask you what I asked myself every night during those dark months. Tell me, would you forgive them? Or would you choose justice? Share your thoughts. Tell me where you're listening from, which city, which corner of the world. And if you want more true Canadian family stories, subscribe to Fractured Vengeance for the next one.